So hello and welcome. Happy Friday. Today is Friday, April the 9th, and this is episode number 105 of Backyard Beekeeping Questions and Answers. And these questions are submitted over the past week. If you're brand new, welcome. I'm glad you're here. If you're listening by podcast, welcome to the podcast at Podbean, The Way to Be. And this is The Way to Be. And let's see, 64 degrees Fahrenheit outside, which is 18 degrees Celsius. But tomorrow it's going to be up in the 80s, so it's going to be super warm again. Great opportunity to get out and work with your bees in the bee yard. So what else is going on? Make sure your water drinkers are out. If you haven't set up a watering station for your bees, it's a good time to do that right now because it's about primacy. Whatever they find and use first, they tend to stay with as they continue through the year. So you want to keep your bees away from your neighbors' bird baths and swimming pools and things like that. Put out a watering station for them now. Don't forget to click a thumbs up down there so that you'll know that you've seen this episode because there are 105 of them. So that will help you. And what else? Oh yeah, shout out to Adam Holmes for all the great work he's doing. He is the one that puts the timestamps on with these questions down below in the comment section so you can find a question that you're looking for instead of listening to the entire thing, although there's nothing wrong with that. I gave him his own page on my website, which is thewaytobe.org, and he actually has created a resource that shows every topic that I've covered and links to that so you can go and visit them so you don't have to hunt all the way around. So a lot of people have sent in their support for him. They love everything he's doing. I appreciate it. And we're going to have to put together a really good appreciation basket kit for Adam Holmes. So anyway, let's get going. We'll start with the very first question from Ben Brown, Greensboro, North Carolina, United States. I've been reading a lot on queens and how they don't seem to be lasting as long as they used to for several different reasons or assumptions. How long on average are your bee weaver queens lasting? Well, I'm glad you asked about the bee weaver queens. For one, they come out of Texas. And a lot of people say, Fred, those bees are from Texas. That's a warm climate. They wouldn't do very well in the northeastern United States where it gets cold and the winters are long. But actually, those bee weaver queens have been doing as good or better than any other bees I've ever kept. So whenever I do a split, if I need a new queen right away, I fly in a queen because I can't buy a package from them. I can't buy a nucleus colony from them because you'd have to go there and physically pick it up. It's just too far away. So how long do they live? Well, they live quite a while, and I know that's not a very good number, so I'm going to say I get a couple of good years out of them. How do I know they live 2 years? Here's where it comes down to backyard bee management for you. Mark your queens or take detailed pictures of them or find some way to identify the queen so you know when she's been superseded, if they've swarmed, and so on. So my queens live on because I moved them out of the colony that they were in originally, because if I make a split, the original queen goes with the split. So now we have a new box. This is the importance of record keeping. You want to make sure and know where you put each queen and how old she is, and identifying factors for sure that you can make sure that that's your queen. So, and painting the thorax, putting a dot on the thorax of the queen, and that's color-coded by year so that then you'll know how many years old they are. But 2 years, here's why I have the magic mark of 2 years. Maybe that queen could go longer, I don't know. But if she's over 2 years old, coming out of her second winter, going into her second spring, those are the ones that I like to split from, breed from, propagate from. Because I know that those queens have some longevity. I also know that they can handle these winters. I also know that they survived, they made it. And the other thing is I look at their traits. So did I have to treat that queen's colony for Varroa destructor mites last year? If I did, was it a big infestation? Was it a little infestation? Was she borderline? Was it about 2%, 1%, 3%? So all of these things contribute to whether or not that's a queen I want to propagate from, as well as how long she lives. So if you're breeding from your queens, this is what I recommend. I mean, let's not say breed from. Let's say splitting from or expanding your apiary from. try to pick a queen that's a couple years old if you can. Now, there is a lot of literature out there. I know there's a lot of beekeepers out there that say go into every winter with a queen that is less than a year old. If you do that, that means you're requeening to make sure that you have a new queen and that the queen that you have is less than a year old. Is that a problem? I think it is. Because we want to know which ones are robust enough to last that long. And it's really great when you've exceeded that 2-year mark and the brood pattern is still strong. In other words, the bees aren't going to supersede their queen based on low performance. So when you get these older queens, to me, this is my opinion and my method, that would be the one that I would choose to continue with. I did like the opening sequence of Slow Motion Bees. That is with a queen, a bee weaver queen that runs that colony, and she has lived there for, this is her 2-year mark. So this spring, one of the strongest colonies in the apiary. She's a very good candidate for being moved into my Long Langstroth hive because I had a dead out in the Long Langstroth. So why pick that queen? She's 2 years old. Now is she going to underperform once you put her in there? No, because here's what I'm going to do. When I put her in there, she's going to continue to build up. Then if they decide to make queen cells, which are swarm cells along the bottoms of the frames, or if she starts to get a little spotty and her brood pattern starts to underperform, showing that she's at the end of her life, that's when I'm going to replace her again. And guess with what? Another bee weaver queen out of Texas. They'll fly that queen in. 2-3 days after it's ordered, I have a new queen and I can replace her. So you want to remove your old queen 3 days on average before you install the new ones so they can be queenless for the proper amount of time. And that's what I would do because I don't want to push my luck and take her into a third winter. So that's the sweet spot for me. 2 years, less than 3 years. So that's what I do. I hope that's helpful to somebody somewhere. Next question, number 2 from JF. This time of year, I'm sure that a lot of us are looking at expanding our numbers of colonies, either making up for winter losses or simply to have more hives to produce more honey, have frames of resources or brood for manipulation between hives or for whatever other reason. There are, of course, many ways of going about expansion. The easiest and most expensive would be by buying a nucleus colony. That's true. Nucleus colonies do build up the fastest, though, with mated queens. But how about if you want to make your own a lot less expense, question mark? What I'm hoping to do, and I know this is not a favorite of yours. Okay, that's funny because you put this is not a favorite of yours. I don't have anything against splitting colonies and creating other colonies from the splits. No problem at all. One of the reasons why the heck do I let bees swarm and go to trees and do that when I could head that off early and create a split, which basically takes away the stimulus for swarming, in theory. It's because I do a lot of stock video and cinema work, and that involves the behaviors of communicating to parting hives, the dynamic of the swarm, the bivouac location, the intermediate spot before they go to their final place, which is where they're going to occupy a cavity somewhere, man-made or in nature. And these are things I video and document because I sell stock video cinema photography. Cinematography and photography. It's part of my job. So otherwise, I would never let them swarm willingly. I would instead make efforts to multiply my apiary if I wanted more bees. I have more bees than I want. So then I would create splits. My favorite, walkaway splits. Somebody else said, hey Fred, would you do a video showing us how you do that kind of thing? And how do you approach it? And yes, I would. I'll make a video this year that shows how I do it. Why? Because I have to occupy that Long Langstroth hive again. It's ready for bees. I have promising colonies that look like they'll do that. So I'm going to share that with you, my YouTube followers, so that we can see step by step. What are the things that show me that the colony is strong enough to be split? What's my method? What are the risks? And does it work? I've never had a split fail. Very lucky. Very lucky. I have had swarm installs take off on their own later. That's a whole different story. But as far as making splits, it's very easy. And you're right, it's free for you in the backyard beekeeping environment. It's very easy to do, so I highly recommend it, and we're going to talk about that. And there's lots of questions in here about how many frames would you move, what's the composition of the frames, and everything like that. We're going to talk about that all in great detail. It's going to be a lot of fun, no kidding. So that's it for that question. Video coming soon, how to make a split, what we're going to do. We're going to tie that in with the Langstroth horizontal hive because that has a lot of interest. People want to know what's going to happen now that we had a dead out there and Fred failed his bees. We're going to move on from that. So next question, number 3, Keith Barton. I have an 8-frame Flow Hive Classic. A nuke was installed in September 2020, Southeast Queensland, Australia. They built up quickly, but did not take to the Flow Super at all well. I removed the queen excluder to encourage more progress into the Flow Super. This worked, but had the unwanted side effect of the queen laying drone brood in the flow frames. I have shaken the majority of the bees, including the queen, down into the brood box and reinstalled the queen excluder, but now there is still drone. Drone are male bees, by the way, if you don't already know. Drone brood are how to get them clear from the super. What would you recommend? Install a temporary top entrance to let the drones escape. Manually remove the brood before it hatches. And we're coming into our winter season here, though it is mild and the bees can fly and forage and maintain brood through most of the year. Okay, this is something that I tested actually early on in my Flow Hive analysis, in my evaluation of the system. Can the queen lay in the flow frames, and would she? And when you leave your frames on through winter, you know, if you leave upper boxes with honey resources on your hive going into winter, it doesn't matter if it's a Flow Super or any other kind of super, you got to get your queen excluder out. Because the queen excluder is a barrier that the queen can't get through. Drones can't get through it either, but we don't care about the drones in wintertime. So anyway, for them to migrate up in there and make use of that honey in the wintertime, there would need to be no queen excluder, so the queen moves with the cluster. Then we're up in those plastic flow frames, which I do not recommend anyone leave on for winter, but we have a situation here. Keep in mind where the Flow Hive is invented in New South Wales, where they don't have a solid winter either. So, you know, Cedar Anderson is making videos right now going into winter showing what they're doing with their flow hives. They don't ever set them up for winter, which is why they only have, and this is critical, this is important, the way it's designed, they set up with a single deep box. This is a flow hive right back here. That actually is the Flow Super because it has the plastic frames in it. The single brood box, 8 frames or 10 frames, is a constant. So every single one of the hives would have to have that as a minimum. The way the originators intend for that to be used is on top of that goes your queen excluder, which looks something like this. This is a big metal one. The ones that come with the flow hives are plastic, but they do the same thing. They keep the queen out. And then your Flow Super goes on there. That is not what I do here in the United States. And I've seen some forums where people made fun of my term, the honey bridge, and they do little wink emojis and ha ha, he he, the honey bridge. Well, actually, that works. So you can make fun of me if you want to, I don't mind. Because what happens is, I let the deep box fill up in spring this time of year. We put at least a medium super on top of that. Bees are migrating down closer to the only entrance that the hive has, which is what keeps them focused as the temperatures rise. It keeps them down towards the entrance with the brood. And then it doesn't matter where you look at a bee hive, whether it's a natural cavity, something somebody discovered in a wall somewhere, in the floorboards, wherever it exists, they have a very predictable layout of resources and use of space. So the frame that they're using where the brood is generally gets a little ring of pollen stored and a little ring of immediate use honey, nectar. Some of it's uncapped, and then they go into the capped honey, and then they go into the long-term storage beyond that. So that area past the brood, past the pollen, past that initial few inches of stored honey is where it becomes nothing but honey. Now, on the very fringe of that, sometimes you will find drone cells. But it's rare to find drone cells way up at the very top of the hive. They're generally on the fringe or the outside edges of the outer frames of that first box. And that's how I get away with, I call that clear zone, where no eggs are being laid, where no brood is being produced, and it's nothing but honey storage. I refer to that as a honey bridge. I didn't know it would become a term. And beyond that, that's where I don't use the queen excluder, because queen excluders slow down production. So there is always a risk when you do that, and that's why I don't tell brand new beekeepers to use the honey bridge method, because you have to predictably see over a period of seasons with your bees exactly how these patterns are established and where we can find brood and where we don't, and that's how you get away with the honey super. One of the things that can encourage your bees to lay their eggs up into that flow super, into those flow frames, is if there's top venting. If there's a top entrance, because now we have another area where they can vent their brood. So it's different, the dynamic, the thermals inside the hive are different, and now the queen might be encouraged to go up there and lay her eggs. So you do need the queen excluder. Now let's go back to the problem. So I recommend in this case that we go ahead and leave the queen excluder in place, because you're going to put it back anyway, where you are and what you're doing, with that limited configuration of a deep and then the flow super right on top of that. So you leave the queen excluder in place, and yes, you establish an upper entrance. Now this is a risk, and I'll talk about what the risk might be. The upper entrance is going to be beneficial to your flow super, because now the foraging bees can come and go out of that upper entrance and not have to go through that tight squeeze of the queen excluder. Which, by the way, a lot of bees will propolize up that plastic queen excluder to the point where they also limit the access points on it. So anyway, moving on. Leave that in place, establish an upper exit, and now of course the drones can hatch out, go their happy way, hunt their queens, whatever they want to do. And the bees will also clean out those plastic cells in those flow frames, and they will be restored to honey use, honey storage. So that's all good. So you do two things. So you get the foragers to come straight into it, so you just increase productivity. You left the queen excluder in place, and now the queen stays down below. No more brood up there. What's the risk then? What's the problem? Well, Cedar Anderson says, and he's the inventor of the flow hive, Cedar and Stuart Anderson. Stuart is the father. Anyway, Cedar says that, well, what if they did a swarm? What if they superseded the queen? And then the queen flies out and does her mating flight, and now there's an upper entrance, and she comes back, and instead of going through the landing board entrance, you have a mated queen that now enters through the top, and now she's stuck in the flow super, cannot get down to the brood frames, and of course she begins to lay exclusively in the flow super. So to me, that's where, because that's a potential, I don't think that's likely, I think it is, however, a potential. So we have to think in terms of what could happen. So for me, that's not a huge risk for what you're doing. Now, because that is what's involved in keeping track of your bees, seeing what's going on. Look at that landing board. If your bees became queenless, you should know about it. You should be looking at the landing board and understanding what that traffic is like, what kind of the natural rhythm is as compared to other colonies in your apiary, and you'll know we got a problem there. We need to look into that hive. So that's my recommendation for Keith. Upper entrance, let the drones get out. Gives the foragers a fast track also, and you get to put your queen excluder back now that, which you already did, to keep that queen down below and behaving herself. So that's it. Detailed management required. You could also, here's another option, if you didn't want to do an upper entrance and everything, you can just uncap the drone cells, exposing the drones, they will die. The workers will clean them out, and then they'll restore the cells to service as nectar cells, honey cells. Question number 4. Wow, we're moving fast. Question number 4 already? George Garcia. Had a friend who wanted to buy my honey because it is organic, and according to her, it is good for allergies. I did not really comment back to her, as I recollected that the research doesn't support the contention. that honey is good for allergies. In any case, most hives have a queen excluder, so bees store the honey in a separate area altogether than the brood area where pollen is stored around the brood or in separate pollen frames. Please discuss your thoughts on the use of honey for allergies. I do know that honey does have pollen in it because labs can identify what part of the world honey comes from. Okay, this is all true. This is a hot topic. A lot of people probably would rather not talk about this. I've given a lot of talks on honeybees, and one of those was at a Whole Foods co-op. And there was a woman right in the front row there that when we got on the discussion about raw regional honey, and the fact that it does contain pollen, and it's true, what's said here, pollen is contained in the honey. That's how we can identify, number one, it's really honey. Number two, the kind of pollen that's in the honey is pollen associated with plants that provide nectar, so we know it's not fake honey because people have learned to fake honey by seeding it with pollen, but then they goof up and end up including pollen that doesn't have anything to do with honey production or plants that would be providing nectar, so we know that's a lie. So anyway, the topic came up just like this. Can we take raw honey and have that help us cope with regional floral allergies? And I wish it were true. And I had a woman right in the front row raise her hand. She had terrible allergies. She started taking raw honey and no longer had to take medication at all, and it all worked fantastic and everything else. So, well, I thought, well, there you have it. Somebody that actually has lived it and had that experience. But then I talked to physicians and I talked to people of science, it seemed to make sense to me. Regional honey, so the area where the person suffers from allergies. Also, you would collect the pollen. We have pollen traps for that, which I've done videos on how to collect pollen. And so they would, if they have spring allergies, let's say, so this time of year, they would want to be taking the pollen that is from this time of year from those plants, because the whole concept is that they build a resistance to it and then their body doesn't react and then they don't have all these miserable symptoms. But I wish I could find scientific research and support for the use of pollen in honey. So regional raw honey being used as a method to deal with people's allergies. And I can't. In fact, when you go down the research rabbit hole and you start looking these things up for scientific underpinnings to make sure that what you're about to tell people is going to be true, and that's a responsibility I have to tell you what's true, what's supported, what's proven, because there's so many people with testimonials about it, what works and what doesn't. But in fact, it flipped the other way. You run a risk of somebody who has these pollen allergies, because pollen is in what they're about to ingest. They don't necessarily have to breathe it to get that going in their system. They could actually ingest pollen in honey and have an issue. So if we're actually, because this comes into play too, because we have pollen traps, why don't people just take a tablespoon of pollen, a teaspoon of pollen itself, the way the bees bring it back? And that's where, you find the most claims of its benefit, and also because it's a superfood and everything else, and somebody else says, well, you do know you can't digest pollen at all, and it goes through basically unaltered. And so without getting too deep into everything, let me fall back on what has been proven to benefit people health-wise when it comes from beehives. The number one thing that is proven to work is the fact that honey is antibacterial, antimicrobial. It has these properties that also preserve it and protect it, which is why it lasts so long in the hive and why it can be used by the bees as a carbohydrate resource. It can be used on wounds, difficult wounds to heal. So things like that. It has helped reduce scarring, speeds healing, keeps wounds clean, in other words, kills off the bacteria on the wound and things like that. Those things are scientifically proven. Another area where honeycomb, which comb honey is honey that's in the comb, and often, like my mom, if you had a cough or something when you were a kid, your mom might have cut out some chunk or comb honey and given you a little square of it and said, here, chew on that, that'll take care of your cough or whatever. And that works. It actually does suppress a cough. So you can actually give a child raw honey going to bed And you would think that sugar jolt would just wake them up and you have a little monkey on your hands bouncing all over the walls in their rooms at night. But no, it calms the cough and can soothe the cough for hours. So that's an interesting yet proven benefit from honey. And so what else? That's the end of it. So if you look for scientific evidence, studies that have proven health benefits, healing wounds, soothing coughs, kind of that's where it ends. So the discussion is always open. This is a very polarizing thing. I know there's going to be a bunch of people that will swear by it, but that's considered anecdotal. When someone has a personal testimony, and there's a whole psychology behind that too, why people feel that because they were doing something when something else occurred, that's why they attribute the healing or the occurrence of a reduction of a symptom to whatever else they were doing at the time. But unless you can biochemically prove that that's a reason why that happened, it really isn't supported in science. Sorry to say. But if something new comes out, then, I'll be glad to talk about it, but I just can't. I used to be one of the people that said that, oh yeah, you want to eat some raw regional honey, and if you have fall allergies, get the honey that was collected in the fall from, goldenrod and whatever else. Find out what your allergies are and make sure that pollen's in that and everything else. I was wrong on that stuff. Anyway, question number 5. John, a.k.a. Mad Dog 7, Gendron, from Grass Valley, California. My question is, in a swarm trap, this is important because we're all talking about swarm traps this time of year, how do I tell the difference between scout and robber bees? Also, would the presence of robber bees discourage a swarm from establishing a colony? I put out a swarm trap 3 days ago on top of my well shed roof. It is 2 stacked wooden 5-frame nukes. I dropped in 2 frames of capped honey and 3 empty frames. I also swiped the inside of the boxes with lemongrass oil with the Q-tip, dipped twice. Yesterday afternoon, I found a dozen bees at the entrance, flying in and out. I assumed the behavior of robbers would be different, as the box is not defended. It is difficult to open this box without a major effort. I will attempt to see inside the box with an endoscope. Weather is sunny and mid-60s Fahrenheit. In my long laying, there's plenty of room, cap brood, resources coming in, and I found only a couple of empty queen cups a week ago. Okay, I can solve this right now. How do we know in a swarm trap if they're robbing or if they're actually looking to move in and reside there? I want to talk about what goes into your swarm trap. In your swarm trap, never put honey, capped, open cells with honey nectar in it. Don't put anything in there that robber bees would find enticing. The reason is exactly what we're talking about here. You'll get bees in there robbing it out that have no intention of moving in. And you can also tell when it's being robbed because, first of all, they're tearing off the capping. So if you ever do get a look in there and you look at the cells, the caps, the nice smooth caps over the honey that you put in there because you're thinking it's going to feed them. I mean, it makes sense, right? That you would put honey in there and a swarm would come in and go, yay, honey, we're already kicking off, we're doing good. The robbers tear those caps open, so they're really rough and ragged and jagged looking. Bees that are looking to live there, that care about it, those edges remain smooth even when they're using the honey. So when they uncap a cell, when they're consuming honey in a cell that are the resident bees, they do it carefully. They amend the wax edges and they take care of everything. The other thing is, right outside that entrance, if they're robbing bees, you will see little brown sticky dots all around the surface. If there's a little landing board there, you'll see these little sticky dots on the landing board too, because robber bees get their feet sticky, and on their way out, they track up the place. So the little dots you see also. But I want to firm this up, that if anybody is setting out a swarm trap this time of year, any time of year, don't put honey in it. Don't put any pollen cells in it. Only put drawn comb if you have it, and just regular foundation that isn't drawn if you don't have anything else. The lemongrass oil is very important, or something like Swarm Commander, which has lemongrass oil in it. And don't overdo it either, by the way. The pheromones that we put in there, There's no reason to overdo it. If you're smelling it really strong, let me tell you, bees smell it from way off. So that lemongrass oil scent carries, and it's pretty lasting. You have to kind of refresh it every week to 2 weeks or whatever. This is an example of Swarm Commander that comes in these little capsules that you break, but I think it says to refresh them every 10 days or something like that. Oh, each swarm lure lasts 20 days. So once you put that in there, so you have to keep it up, but don't overdo it. Like, don't smear it everywhere. And I like to not put it a little touch on the side of an entrance, not in the center of an entrance. Little touch on the side. And then in the back, on the top of the frames that are in there, that's where I'll put I use 2 or 3 Q-tips dipped in it, and then I put them in a Ziploc baggie, and then I cut the little corners off the back of the Ziploc baggie. Put that up in there. That lasts a long time. So that encourages the scouts to go and scope it out. They pick up that scent. They can follow that for a long distance, and they'll find it. But please don't put honey or pollen or full frames like that in the hive. It does attract the robbers, and we don't want robbers. We don't care about them. It just became a feeding station, really. So clear that out, and then you'll know the bees that are in it. When you see bees coming and going, they're scouting, they're pacing off the interior of it to make sure it's the space that they want. And then you do sometimes see little defenders on the landing board that are placeholders, that are kind of like holding somebody's space for them, and they're kind of guarding it because other scouts from other colonies might be looking at the same space. Moving on, question number 6. Ann Klein, Bonita, California. Hello, Mr. Dunn. I'm confused about something I hope you can help me out with. You said, if we see drones on the hive, that we can do splits then. But I'm confused since the drones aren't mature yet when they just hatched out. Why do you tell us it's okay at that time? I enjoy your videos. I've learned so much. Thank you so much. Anyway, here's the thing. And I always say that don't do splits or anything else until you can see that there are drones outside. Now let's say, I understand why this can be concerning to people because they're thinking, oh, you're going to release the queen and the drones are mature and they're not flying, so therefore there wouldn't be drones in the drone congregation area. For those of you who don't know, when a virgin queen hatches out, she leaves the hive, she flies to a drone congregation area, who knows where it is, and she mates with drones that are not related to her, and then she comes back. So what if the drones on that landing board are indeed brand new, newly hatched out drones? It's true. They're not ready to mate right away. They have to sexually mature. But let's say that I green-lighted that and said, yeah, there they are. There they are on that one too, and there they are over there. So therefore the drone congregation areas in the area are going to be ready. So now we can do a split, and when we do a walk-away split, what happens? They have queen cells in there. So we're talking about drones that have already hatched out, that are present, that we see them coming and going inside and hitting up all the worker bees for their food and resources to keep them going and everything else, because the drones, as you know, are just beggars, and they make everybody take care of them. Now, if a queen hatched out right then, she's not flying right then. The queen that hatches out, the virgin queen, she's not ready to mate. She's got a good 9 days that she still has to scoot around, get acquainted with everybody, kind of get her pheromone going, and she gets healthy, hardens off, exercises her flight muscles, gets ready to make that flight. So she may not be doing her mating flight for 9 days. Well, by then, all those drones that we've seen are definitely mature enough to mate with queens, which is an indicator environmentally that if we have the drones and they're ready to go, there must be other drones in the area that are also flying out ready to go looking for virgin queens. That's why I say that. So we kind of get fixated on, well, those drones can't mate, but yeah, there's also the biology of the queen, so she is not prepared to mate, even if she hatches the same day. See, so they're all like maturing together. So I hope that answers that question. Moving on to question number 7. Stephanie from Long Beach, California. Greetings from the West Coast. I just started beekeeping this pandemic year, and I have 3 hives in boxes and 2 in the wild on my property. One of my boxed hives did swarm a week ago, but I was ready with my nuke, so they are safe and rebuilding. My question is, roughly a week before they swarmed, I noticed hundreds hundreds of dying drones right outside the hive. Is this a sign that the hive is preparing to swarm? Also, I wondered if I could collect those dead and dying drones and do an alcohol wash inspection for mites. Just wanted to take advantage of the situation, even if the mites I find are dead. Okay, so here we go to biology again. Let's think about what we're trying to do. So first of all, dead drones in front of a hive, does that mean that they're preparing to swarm? No, those things are not related. Sometimes if we're heading into a dearth period or the environment's not providing everything they need, the worker bees inside a colony will kick out drones. But what I want to get to is, could you do a mite wash on these dead drones, dying drones in front of the hive? How do you know that they're from that hive? Because drones are beggars at every doorstep. So the drones that show up at your colony may not even be from that colony, especially the ones that are outside. In fact, I've seen some guard bees on the landing board have drones that are so persistent about getting into that hive to get fed by some worker bee in there that they'll be stung to death right on the landing board. So sometimes worker bees repel them, and sometimes guard bees actually kill them. So they can be rejected to the point where they're not fed, and therefore they starve out and die, and they're dying or dead in front of that hive. The other thing is, how many drones would have mites on their bodies? So when are the mites most likely to be found on the drone, which is the male bee? For those of you who don't know, it's also the largest bee that you see in there. People often mistake them for the queen if they're uninitiated and don't understand really what a queen looks like. They look at drones and say, see my queen, I've got a queen, there she goes. So anyway, when are the mites on the drones? Well, mites are attracted to drones when they are about to enter their pupa state. This is when they're about to be capped. So about the 9th day, just before capping occurs, the little Varroa destructor mite scoots right in there with them, and they're eating. So they're feeding and reproducing in the cell with the drones. Here's what happens. So the Varroa destructor mite is reproducing in drone cells. They can do it in worker cells too, but they're just very attracted to drone cells because they have a longer pupae period. So more reproduction for the Varroa destructor mite. Now what happens when the drone gets hatched out, because they don't even hatch themselves. In fact, while the drone, after a worker has chewed off his cap for him, gets fed by the nurse bees and everything else on his way out. So here's the thing. It's not impossible to find Varroa destructor mites on the bodies of drones. You usually find them on their abdominal plates. But guess where those little Varroa destructor mites go? They go after the softest bodied, most well-fed, healthiest little targets that they can find. And where do they find them? Already on the brood frame where the drone just hatched out. And the drones are, of course, usually out on the periphery and stuff like that. So they skitter along and they get on top of those little nurse bees that are young and soft and not very defensive and not very tough. So, for example, guard bees don't come from nurse bees. Nurse bees are still maturing, and so they're full of resources that the Varroa destructor mite takes advantage of. So that's why, by the way, when you're testing for the Varroa destructor mite, you sample from your nurse bees from the brood frames, because that's where you're going to get your highest mite counts, because that's where they're hanging out. But now back to the original question, regardless of where those drones came from, because drones, as I said, they hop from hive to hive, colony to colony, and they're welcomed and they get fed. It's really interesting. I've seen a bunch of different colored drones, for example, all at one colony, so I know they didn't all come from there, because they all would be coming from the queen, which means they would all look alike. Anyway, so it doesn't mean they're preparing to swarm. Not a good resource for testing for Varroa destructor mites, but you could do it and see if you even get a mite from their bodies. So, because the fun thing too is, if you're just doing a handful of drones, you can look them over. The mites are visible. They get between those plates. So you see the plate raised up just a little bit, and the mite is perfectly contoured to match the abdomen of that drone. And you'll see that little tan edge there, that little burgundy colored, kind of tannish edge of the mite in there. And you don't have to use alcohol. You can use Dawn dish detergent and the mites will release. And you can use alcohol if you want to, but there are a lot of ways to get to figure out how to get them to release from the body of the drones if they're on the drones. So the other thing that's cool is I hope that Stephanie follows up and lets us know, were there Varroa destructor mites on the drones? That would be cool. I mean, but as I said, it's not a meaningful mite count because we don't know that they even came from that particular colony. They could have drifted. Question number 8 is from Tim Bateson of Fairfield Township, Ohio. I watched your video on setting up the Better Bee frames. You mark the top of each of these, and that makes perfect sense for these. Do you mark your other frames as well? Type, date, type of thing. Could you tell us why if you do? Okay, here's the thing where it's going to be, do what I say, not what I do. I'm terrible at marking my frames, but I do recognize it is a very important tool. Why? First of all, what kind of foundation is it? Because we have a lot of wooden frames that have plastic foundation installed, and did that come from Mann Lake? Did that come from Dadant? Did that come from Better Bee? Is it from Acorn? So these are all things that we can know because we enter them into our logs and we'll know, and the bees kind of didn't really draw out their comb on that frame. What's that about? So how do you mark the frames? If they're the plastic frames, I recommend China markers and get the packs that have the different colored China markers. Plastic frames, sometimes they're black because I like to be able to, like the Acorn frames that I use, heavy wax Acorn frames. If I take a black China marker, it doesn't work. So you have to use white China markers. So then the other thing is you can get into color coding. I think a whole pack of China markers with a variety of colors is like $12. And they last a very long time and they write on all surfaces. So you'd be good to go. If you have nothing but wooden frames, I like to mark things with Sharpies. Here's one of the fattest Sharpies that you can get anywhere. This is the Sharpie Magnum. Look at the size of the chisel tip on that. So if you want to make bold marks identifying the frames, the most common thing to identify them with is the year that you installed them, year and month. That tells us a lot of things. When we're doing inspections, and I know, we think, I'm backyard beekeeper, I have like 2 colonies, why should I even keep records? Well, we know that we want to rotate out the oldest frames, so it's helpful to have the date and month, the date, the year and month that they were put in. And of course, I'd have a code or something for the foundation instead of writing it all out. Because I used to mark them double dipped, triple dipped, so 3x, 2x, 1x to see if the bees took to it quicker, if you had more dip cycles of putting the beeswax coating on the frame, and that turned out to be true. It was directly correlated. The more beeswax that was on that frame, in this case it was from Acorn, the bees drew out the frame with the most wax on it the earliest, so it was pretty interesting. So that's information you can put on there, but I highly recommend grease pencils. With the wooden frames, the time to do it, if you're going to use Sharpies, by the way, because they stink. So when you're putting markers on it, hopefully you're not going straight into the frames with it, but while you're assembling your wooden frames, gluing them up, tacking them together, all the stuff you're doing, that's a good time to mark them if you know what foundation you're using. And then of course you hold off later and mark them with, the month and year that they go into service. So another vote for keeping really good records and get a collection of multicolored China markers. I use the China markers to mark the backs of the hives too. So what you notice when you inspect the hive and things like that, and dates of inspection. Some people like to pull the insulated cover off your hive or whatever your cover is and have a sheet attached in there that you can make your annotations on. So it's always good to gather, document that information. Question number 9. Honeyspoon Bee Wrangler is the name. Newbie here. Where is the best place to keep my suit? Away from other clothes due to the pheromones, I take it. Is it okay to keep indoors or best in a shed or garage? Thanks. Well, I'm glad you asked that because, these are bee suits back here. I think it's important for beekeepers, for those who wear bee suits. Some people wear just the veil, they put on gloves or whatever. Like our state bee inspector, always pay attention to how he dresses. He wears a shirt a lot like this one, veil and helmet, and then just ties it up. So my favorite suit, while we're talking, is a ventilated bee jacket. Just the jacket with the fencing type veil attached to it. And I recommend that you have more than one, and here's why. Because you might have to have one out of service while it gets repaired. You might tear it or do something to it. The other thing is you might get into it with one of your colonies of bees and you might get a bunch of stings on the suit. Which means that they marked it. So there's pheromone, there's threat pheromone on there and everything else. The other thing is your suits get really dirty and they carry a smell of their own. You don't want, I mean, I'm not trying to be personal here, but maybe there's a bunch of body odor built up. Some people wear these full-size vented suits, not even kidding, full-size vented suits with nothing on underneath with them. Thank goodness for strategic pocket placement on those suit designs, because that's a bold move. So the bottom line is you want to keep your suits clean, and you might have one in the wash, so then what are you going to wear when you have your suit ready to go? So 2 suits, and then what would you wash it with? I made my wife get this after I read an article. This is Tide Free and Gentle. It's probably expensive. Oh, I know where I found out about this. Guardian Bee Apparel. There's one of their vented suits back there. It's an American bee suit company, Guardian Bee Apparel. And they have the zippered veil, so you can flip that down and drink water, do whatever you want. They make really good suits, but he's the one that I contacted years ago and said, hey, what should we be using to wash the suits when the time comes? And so you can launder your suit, remove the veil, so unzip that, take that off, hand wash it. So that's why I recommend at least 2 suits. You might be repairing one or it might be in the wash, while the other one you need to be ready to go and deal with your bees on a moment's notice. So the other thing is storage, where you put them. I hang mine, like I have some hanging here. I have some hanging in a coat rack in the hall. I have a couple suits hanging in the garage, and of course I have them hanging in the bee shed. So I'm a suit nerd. I have every kind that's out there. And one of the reasons I like to have them too is because somebody's visiting. I can put them in a bee suit. 5-year-old shows up, I have a bee suit for you. 3-year-old, I have a bee suit for that 3-year-old. So I have suits for all sizes. I don't have this like triple extra large bee suits and stuff like that, but anything up to a large, I think I keep them. Now the other thing is for the ones that are out in the shed, in the bee shed, what else lives in the bee shed? Mice. So meadow mice get in there, and the deer mouse, which by the way scales walls like a champion. So one thing I found is if you don't store away your suits in the wintertime, they move into the pockets and stuff like that and make their nests. If they find that your bee suit material, like some of the Flow Hive, the Flow company makes the softest 100% organic cotton bee suits that they're like pajamas, they're that soft. Mice will actually chew them up and use that fabric for bedding. So I have a very large black plastic tote that after everything is dry and clean, goes into that tote for winter, and we throw some desiccant packs in there too, so there's no moisture problems, and that keeps them all fresh. So an unscented cleaning detergent and desiccant packs and storage in winter to keep them away from rodents if you're storing them out in the garage, the shed, your bee barn, things like that. So I hope that's helpful. It's funny that mice will go into a bee suit and make a nest in a pocket. I mean, I guess that's cozy for them. Question number 10, this comes from MMB. Doesn't say where he or she is from. And this was posted on the video that we just posted about the landing board with all the pollen coming in. So there's a bunch of questions here. I saved it for last because it's fairly involved. Bee-related stuff. Question, can I ask if you might consider a video on the Flow Hive plastic frames? How to keep them in good shape? The do's and the don'ts with the key system. What happens to them long term? Do you have to keep them in good shape? The do's and the don'ts with the key, blah, blah, blah. Lifespan, reuse example. They're brittle, do they crack? Somebody did send me a picture of a flow frame. These are the mechanized frames, and you do put a long stainless steel key in there, you turn it, and it lifts the yolk on the top, which causes them to shift, which means they break the cell, which is why the honey flows down through it into a trough, out into your jar through a tube. So it is a mechanism, so it has to function, and it is made out of plastic, a very, very resilient food-grade plastic that they did a lot of tensile tests and shear tests and everything else on it when it was in production, because the Flow Hive was in production for over 10 years before it actually hit the streets through Indiegogo, which is a funding campaign kind of thing. So anyway, I've had them for 5 years, and I've had them in continuous use, and I retired my original Flow Super at 5 years. And I'm doing a lot of things to see how to clean it up. How much cleaning do I need to do? I have them being cleaned right now while I'm making this video, because I am going to do a fairly comprehensive video that assesses what it looks like after 5 years. When do you need to just replace those frames? Now, when we look at, if you go to Flow, if you go to the Flow Hive YouTube channel, and you look at the presentations there showing the Flow Hive in New South Wales and some other places too, you'll notice that every time they open up a Flow Hive, those frames look brand new. And I always meant to ask, are your frames brand new? Do you constantly rotate them out? I mean, they're the manufacturer. They could afford to swap out frames every year if they wanted to. So I've never asked them, at what year are you retiring your Flow frames? So I don't know what they're doing. And I have asked before what to use to clean them. And then I've heard some people at the Flow forums recycle information that I've said, like get a power washer and, put them up against a wire cage, and then we power wash them out, which you can do too. But you find out that the wax and the propolis is very resilient, and power washing does not necessarily disinfect it. So I'm experimenting with other things. I haven't drawn my own conclusions, but when I find something that works, then as far as cleaning them up, we're going to talk about that. I'm going to show before and after. So this will be coming up hopefully this year, and we're going to talk about this stuff too. The other thing is, do they get brittle and do they break? And are they left on through the winter? Well, as I mentioned earlier today, we don't leave them on through winter in cold climates because we have to pull them off after the final Flow harvest. So we let the bees clean them up, then we get them out of there. So they don't winter over. But would that damage the plastic if they were left out in the freezing cold? There's nothing I know of, when it comes to the physical material properties, that plastic, once it goes through a freeze cycle, would now be more brittle. The single most detrimental thing you can do to those plastic Flow frames is expose them to sunlight, ultraviolet light. That would break them down. So I'm very careful that mine are never in direct sunlight, and in the hive they never are either. They're always in the dark. So I haven't noticed a loss in flexibility, but there is, he asked here too, is there a way that you use the keys to help reduce the stress on it? Yeah, and I demonstrate that in my YouTubes that I've done on harvesting Flow hives. I use 2 keys and I turn them together. That way I don't just have one key going down the middle and that little yolk stretches up before it finally catches up and moves. That concerns me a little bit. I mean, I've never broken one, but if I'm relying on that center yoke, it just makes sense to me to put 2 keys in there, rotate them at the same time, and use the shoulder to lift those frames and cycle them. But I've not broken one yet, and maybe I need to just take my oldest frame and do a destructive evaluation, see what it can take, and do close-ups of all the wear surfaces and everything like that, and compare those to a brand new one and see what kind of wear and tear is happening. But as far as I can tell, no wear and tear. They're just ugly. So I don't leave them on year-round. To answer the next question, then we talk about lifting. He can't lift, so when do you lift off your Flow Supers for inspection? As soon as you have sight, because they're heavy. So if you have problems lifting, Flow hives are not lightweight. This is why they do offer the 6 frame, which matches up with the 8 frame Langstroth box, and they have the 7 frame, which is most popular for me, and that lines up with the Langstroth 10 frame, but those are heavy. So you need to physically be able to lift a lot of weight to pull off a Flow Super that's even half full of honey. So one of the options for that is you can pull them frame by frame, which I find super disruptive. It's much better if after you've cycled those Flow frames and taken the honey off, that's when you pull that frame out. That's when you inspect your boxes down below. And of course, like this time of year, you can inspect everything. So before your meaningful nectar flow kicks in, and that's when you're going to put on your Flow Super, a little bit ahead of that, that's when you're doing, of course, your bottom box inspections and things like that. But lifting a full Flow Super is no small thing. We're looking at 3.5 gallons of honey on average in one 7-frame Flow Super. So it's heavy stuff. Let's see what else is in here. As yet, the bees have had the honey for themselves. My first year, second year, cut comb. Hopefully you can get the second. What else are people doing? YouTuber said, buy the frames only and use them in a horizontal hive. Adapted, of course, for key access, etc. Okay, so the horizontal hives, like a long Langstroth, Flow Supers, Flow frames are not the same as the regular frames, so that box is not interchangeable. So if you were to build a horizontal hive specifically to accommodate Flow frames, those plastic mechanized frames, the rabbet joint that they rest on would be different than the ones that are there for your regular frame. So they need more space above them. The other thing is, the way Flow frames work, when it comes time to extract honey from them, you tip the whole hive approximately 2 degrees so that when when the honey goes down into the trough, it trails out through the tube and out instead of dripping off inside the hive, which if it's overwhelmed and there's too much honey coming down, it will do that if it can't get out that bottom drain. So if you're putting in a horizontal configuration, that horizontal hive needs to be able to tilt 2 degrees towards the drain side when you're draining those frames. So that's the only thing I worry about when I look at somebody's horizontal hive and I see that they've made it to accommodate flow frames. Where's the tilt mechanism? How is that part going to go? Are you going to tilt the whole horizontal hive? Are you going to tilt just the part that the flow frames are in? So I don't know. Or are they suggesting that now you pull out flow frames and put them on the bench and drain them that way? So there's some things that are kind of up in the air for me as far as how that's supposed to work in the horizontal long Langstroth configuration and things like that. So I understand lifting is difficult for a lot of people. Anyway, so many folks rant about the downside of flow frame systems. Its ease of use stuff has its merits for those who do not want to deal with honey hive boxes. That's me. Comments elsewhere on YouTube. B Video said Fred Dunn would know the ins and outs of flow frames in long-term use. Do they last? Are they durable? How's the build quality changed? Have the hives changed in design? Over to you. Okay. With the hive iterations that have come out, Flow Hives, the Flow Hive Basic, Flow Hive, there's the Flow Hive 2, and now there's the brand new Flow Hive 2 Plus, which has a bunch of integrated pest management built into it. Really nice aluminum stand. I'm putting one of those together this week. And so what's changed? The flow frames themselves, the plastic frame, has been unchanged through all of those new iterations. It's still the same frame. So those frames are compatible no matter which flow hive style that you get. And if you're just brand new and you're thinking about, you just want to see if it's going to work, don't buy a whole flow hive. Things are expensive. Buy a Flow Super. There's also the hybrid Flow Super, which I don't like at all. That's like 3 or 4 frames that are flow frames. The rest of them are regular conventional frames outside of that. I don't like that. I would go with, you can build your own box for them too, by the way. Just know in advance that whenever you're setting it up and you're planning to use just the flow frames or something like that, think ahead on how you're going to be able to tilt it that 2 degrees back opposite the landing board, because they're going to drain to the back, not the front. So there's a lot of things to think about, but your cheapest route for a flow hive is to get the Flow Super, which is just that box. And that way you know you're not even going to put that on the hive unless they're doing so well that you know they're going to fill it. So you can put it on your strongest colony. That's the end of today's questions. Now we're just doing the fluff. Oh, that's what I want to talk about. Look at this pure beeswax wafer. This is a pound, and I weighed it this morning. 1 pound and 2 ounces. Where did I get this beeswax? Time and time again, you see people inspecting their hives, and they get their hive tool out, and they scrape off the tops of the frames, the back bar of the frames and stuff, and the inner cover and all that stuff, and they just flip it on the ground over here, flip it on the ground over there. This wax right here is the result of hive inspections. So these are just the scrapings off the top, the burr comb, the in between the boxes, leveling things off and stuff like that. So you could be saving your wax, collecting it. I melted this down at 145 degrees Fahrenheit, and I have a slow cooker, like a crock pot, that's set aside just for wax. And then see how it gets this sweet concave shape? I just fill it up 2/3 with water, and I throw all the wax bits in there, and then this naturally rises to the surface and separates out from the water. You can pour it through an old t-shirt or something like that and into a plastic bin or something like that to keep it, but 145, 150 degrees is very good. You don't want to overheat your wax because you can ruin it. This stuff actually still feels really good and soft. What would you do with it? Well, you snap it up into little pizza shapes and chunks like that, and then this is what you use to rub on the foundation when you're reusing your frames and stuff like that to get the bees to want to use it. So anyway, I just wanted to point out you might be wasting lots of stuff. So the other thing is, I just want to make sure that everybody knows, try to keep records, even when you only have just one hive. When did you get your queen? How much did you pay for? What frames did you buy? What was your honey yield? What time of year did your bees show that they were preparing to swarm? All these things will become valuable to you as you identify trends through the years going forward, and I hope it will be many years while you keep your bees. If you're not already a subscriber, I invite you to subscribe. I also invite you to look in the video description here and join us if you want to do the HiveGate evaluations that we've got going on. There's a page link for that. And if you want to join a fellowship, the Way to Bee Fellowship on Facebook, for those of you who still use Facebook, it gives you a chance to talk to people, see what other people are doing, ask a question 24/7. No matter where you are in the world, there will be somebody there that can give you some advice or share their own experiences and help you make decisions. So I hope today's video was helpful, and I hope you have a fantastic weekend. Thanks for being here, and thanks for listening.